and jump right into it. Okay. Greetings, everyone. For those that don't know me, failure. My name is Warren. I work for MiCare. Previously, I worked for New Hope Foundation. Today is a session on resume design, but it's called it Resumes That Social Work because it's really designed, it's really a cheesy pun, I'm so sorry. It's really designed for the client cohort that we work with. You will pick up some lessons for your own, but I've got a very comprehensive social work resume session which goes for around 7 hours. That's going to be much harder for the permanent staff here to arrange 7 hours away from their regular duties, but I'll definitely forward all of you those presentations as well. So before I start, I'd just like to ask a question. How long should a resume be? Does anyone know?
Maybe as concise as possible.
Concise as possible. How many pages do you think?
2.
1 to 2? 2? Any other differences? I haven't heard the right answer yet. 3?
3?
Well, I'm sorry, but that sounded a bit sarcastic, but there is no right answer there as well. And when I said I haven't heard the right answer yet, it's absolutely a true thing. There is no prescriptive length, shortness, duration, whatever it might be for a resume. So every person has their own requirements, and that's why there's no golden book, there's no one set way. When you make a cake, there's pretty much a hard and fast method, but a lot of people have recipes, right? And a lot of people have variations. The resume is the same thing. So what we're going to talk about today is the different types of resumes we could use for our client cohort. Just off the bat, the reason for this session is I was approached by Heidi, or I approached Heidi as well, and we talked about one of the programs, the HSP program. Who's here in the HSP? You too? I believe that there's a requirement now that 20% or 25% of your client cohort has to find work or be assisted into work. Is that right? Yeah. So, and that's probably a bit new for the settlement workers in the room. It's a little bit of a scaring notion there as well. We envision that 20% requirement will probably eventually, not now, but over the next 5 or 10 years, move to every part of the contract as well. So we thought we'd just get in early, start training everyone in every area about this area. But secondly, many of you have worked in settlement for some time. At the very end of their settlement phase, they ask for help with finding work, right? They get to that stage where they've got stable housing, they've got their kids in school, they've got their own support networks, but now they want to find work. So this is really what this is aimed for, is to try and get you to that stage that you're able to pass on some abilities and knowledge through to those clients. It's a 40-minute session today. There'll be a lot of time to answer questions, but please shoot up your hand or interrupt at any time. If you've got a mobile phone, I'd ask you to switch it on silent if possible, but certainly take a call. We all have emergencies, especially with the settlement space.
Sorry, I didn't know where you were.
It's all good. Yeah, there's a little guy just beside you, so no worries. And take a seat up here. It's a bit squeezy, I'm sorry about that. So basically it's a 40-minute session. As part of a whole package, there's 2 training sessions today, one before 12:30 and one after lunch, which is about 1:30 there as well, which would be the part 2. The first part will be really dense with theory, because I know social workers love theory. I'm pretty new to strength-based training, but I've certainly been using it all my time. I didn't know about that I was using it or the terminology, so I'm certainly going to draw upon your knowledge and expertise as well. In regards to safety, be aware that we've got some seats with casters. Don't sit on them on a polished floorboard, you'll just go scooting around, so be really careful if you're sitting on a seat with casters. We've got a trip hazard here as well, but if you're hurt, we've got a first aid officer, Sanaz, out the front. The assembly area is across the road, I believe, in the car park there as well, so if we have a fire evacuation, I'll guide you out to that area as well. Alright, so we'll just get straight into it and talk about the learning objectives. So by the end of today's session, we'll be able to use the strengths-based approach to build clients' confidence and realise their employability skills. Now, many of you have used strength-based theory. Have you covered that at university? Yes? And I'm sure all the practitioners here would exhibit that in most cases as well. I'm pretty new to that theory, but I think hopefully over the years of me working in recruitment, I've developed strength-based theory. When I first started, I would definitely say I wasn't a practitioner of. very much directing people down areas and telling them to get this, to get that, rather than focusing on where their individual strengths were. We will change the process of capturing information. Refugees and humanitarian entrants, typically when they come into Australia, they don't bring anything with them. They flee their country in such desperate circumstances that they leave many of the important formal documents like a visa, their employment documents, their education. It's the last thing they want to take with them when they flee. The next part is talking about writing a document which will become a digital version of your brain, or getting your client to start writing down features about themselves. And the final one is the isolation test, which is my own invention, which will help you add, I suppose, consistency and contextualise your resume as well. All right, strength-based social work theory. Can anyone tell me what it actually is, apart from the definition that's there? And do you use it every day? What's the foundations of strengths-based social work?
Looking at individual capacity and how people can use those existing forms of resilience to overcome.
Absolutely. And that's something that's very unique to the social work or community sector. It's not focusing on deficiencies, it's focusing on what they have and trying to build on what they have, to build courage, to build confidence, to pursue other opportunities. I found this really great diagram, which basically have a cycle of illumination, connection, inspiration, and achievement. First part is illumination, and that's basically when you question and talk to clients and ask them about what their background is. You try to use open-ended questions where possible working with refugees. Closed-ended questions don't really elicit good information there as well. But the first stage basically, and the benefits of strengths-based, is people are involved in the process. Everyone has strengths, whether tapped or untapped, or whether they feel they're worthy or unworthy. All strengths are worthy. Strengths foster motivation for growth, but also strengths are internal and environmental. One of the biggest issues that we have in Australia is the connectedness for refugees. We all have our support networks. When we have kids, we have grandparents, we have aunties, uncles, we have people who've gone through that cycle. We can draw upon their knowledge. And it's a really famous saying, it takes a community to raise a child. Imagine if you migrated to Australia, what's happened to your community? It's gone. So the first thing they seek is a sense of community. So what happens is they look for people from a similar background. They try to set up the networks that they had overseas here. But it's really difficult. They can't just leave their child unaccompanied here in Australia. Here we have very strict childcare rules. We can't leave a child of a certain age by themselves. So what's involved with that is a big cost area as well. So this cycle here of illumination, connection, inspiration is really, really important. The first stage is illumination, is asking them, where have you worked? Either volunteer, non-for-profit, or in a paid capacity. So get them information. They might have said, I've worked on a farm. That's great. Build on it and draw a connection to jobs here. Farm work's really important here. We've got a big agricultural base in Victoria, particularly over in Werribee and this area. Then draw inspiration. Tell them about the jobs that are in growth. Agriculture is a growth sector, especially with a growing economy here. And then lastly, achievement. You all write action plans for clients, right? When they reach a milestone in the action plan, that's when you say, well done, let's get to the next step now as well. And I think as social workers, the best analogy I have is where everyone else sees a wall, a social worker finds a door. And I think that that's why it's very important to go through this cycle as well. So it's focusing on what you can do rather than what you can't do. I really like this little logo. I found this thing online there as well. So do use open-ended questions to illuminate the strength or skill. Do connect the strength to an actual skill that exists in a workplace. A lot of people believe, oh, I've been looking after kids for 5 years, there's no skill development from that. But there is. There's a lot of skills in looking after kids. Time management, multitasking, budgeting is a huge one. Sorry about that. Yeah, multi-skill, budgeting, those things as well. How we reference it, that's the difference. Give clients positive feedback and inspire them. So certainly say, with that skill, you could potentially do this, but we need to develop these skills in conjunction with what you already have. And then lastly, celebrate the achievements. Tiny little milestones may not seem significant to a lot of people, but for us and our cohort, it helps them move forward, if that makes sense, yeah? No worries. So for myself, I used the strengths-based approach only recently. I used to work for the Job Network or Job Active. Has anyone had dealings with the Job Active system? Yeah, I hear laughter suddenly coming from mouth. Yeah, I used to be one of those Job Active workers. They've got a thing called a participation report. If a client doesn't turn up to an appointment, you have to put a result in. The result then triggers the centre link to either re-establish contact or cut off their payment. Now, if you were a social worker and you called in a client and the client knew you cut off their payment, how would the relationship be? Good or bad? Horrible, let me tell you. I have put in only one participation report. I refuse to do them. So at the end of the day, what I used to do is ring up the client and just reschedule an appointment so it wouldn't put in that participation report. We got in trouble from the department because we weren't satisfying that metric of sending through warnings and participation reports. I thought it was barbaric to penalise someone for not turning up to my appointment, if that makes sense. So even from the beginning, I just didn't enjoy that punitive system. So I was grateful to move further into New Hope, and we did a lot more community employment projects, which was so much better. Not a punitive system. I don't think a punitive system works very well for our cohort, and it definitely doesn't work well for me. So not everyone you see in the Job Network will have the same mentality as me. Some of them might have their spirits a bit broken, might be a bit crushed by that sort of area. But certainly after a while it does wear you down, and they've got those same performance requirements that we now have, the 20% people are finding work. With the HSP program, it's timeline based, is that right? You've got to do certain actions by certain deadlines?
Not so much, it was in the HSS.
Yeah.
Yeah, we still have expectations, but it's not so much dictated.
Oh, that's great. It used to be what we used to call checkbox social work. You used to have to do a certain thing by a certain stage and put that in. I'm not sure if it's still the same.
It's still like that. Yeah.
And so there is still a checkbox, but
Definitely.
maybe the punitive
There's
parts.
more checkboxes now.
What's that?
There's more checkboxes now.
If anything, all that's worse. I'm sorry about that. So I've stirred up a horrible remnant memory.
It's smaller components now, so it's...
There you go. Yeah. The challenges with working with our cohort, they have varied levels of English. They've got a fragmented employment history. They might have gaps due to migration. Some of them may have been in a camp or a refugee processing area for 5, 6, 7 years. When they arrive in Australia, they have minimal family support. Often they're disconnected from their own family. The husband or wife is separated and they have to reunify after a time. So a lot of their support networks are stripped away, so it's quite difficult. They have minimal formal experience. Many refugees and humanitarian entrants worked cash in hand. They may not have been on a payroll system. They might also have just worked on a family farm in that sort of environment. So it's very difficult to get records and certain things that would verify the sort of work experiences that they have. Lack of ID documents, qualifications, testimonials, references, basically paperwork. I don't know if you've ever been to a session with Heidi. Has she ever done has anyone ever done Heidi's cross-cultural training? That one? She used to basically put down 100 items on a table, pots, pans, beans, food, staples, diplomas, passport, and she said, you've got 2 minutes to leave, you hear gunfire, you have to leave your house, otherwise you're going to be in trouble. What do you take with you? Most people went straight for the passports and such. The refugees don't think that way. They think about immediate survival. So what did they go for? The pans, the beans, the food staples to survive the next few weeks. But some persons did take the passports. Other people were instructed not to take them or to destroy them. If they're caught with their identity documents, what can happen? Very negative consequences. So often when they flee, the situation around their migration can be very, very tense, which means there's not a lot of verification documents to assist with finding work or giving, status. Referees. Many of our clients don't have the process of referees. Recommendations happen overseas for their work. Might be a family relative works there, hire my cousin, very different situation. So here they may have minimal referees, so they might ask you as a social worker to be a referee. Is anyone a referee for their clients? Yep. Yeah, it happens quite often. So, and the last thing is memory. What can you remember when put on the spot? I'm going to put someone on the spot now. I'm going to say, Eva, what did you have for dinner last night?
Soup.
Okay. It's probably a pretty good choice. It was pretty cold. If you go back to Sunday night 3 weeks ago, what did you have?
No idea.
Okay. Most people don't because it's short-term memory. And what we choose to commit to memory and what actually goes to memory are two very different things. You might say what you ate isn't important, but often people forget the most important things because they don't write it down or they don't move it from short-term memory to long-term memory. Memory fades. We forget facts over time, which is transience. Absent-mindedness. You know when you've got your mobile phone and you walk around the house and you leave your mobile phone somewhere and then suddenly, what happens? You don't know where it is. I'm lucky I've got one of these iPhones and you can actually do a phone tracker by pressing a button, which is fantastic. So my phone's there, sorry, now. So you can do those things. We also block. Have you ever been in that situation where someone says, they ask you a trivia question and you go, oh my God, and you do that right on the tip of your tongue? That's another situation as well. Sometimes we incorrectly remember facts. Sometimes we're suggestible, so people can convince us this was part of the memory and we include it in the initial memory. We also have bias. Sometimes we've got a bias based on the circumstance. When you first meet someone, first impressions last, there's a thing called the halo effect. Have you ever heard of that one before? The first interaction or meeting with someone will govern all future meetings. So that's why it's so important to have that really good first impression. But you have a bias in that sort of way. But also there's persistence. Sometimes the memories are traumatic. We've got a cohort that's sometimes trying to forget trauma and torture or their migration experience. And have many of you heard stories about clients' migration experience? Yeah, it's really, really intense. We used to have, I'm not sure if we used to have it, but we have critical incidents within New Hope Foundation, now MiCare, and that's when a client divulges something so traumatic to you that it affects you on a profound level as well.
It actually doesn't happen often because clients, like you said, try to forget, they don't want to talk about it.
Absolutely.
It's actually rare that we hear those stories.
Yeah, it's only when they feel comfortable that they might divulge that, and that's over time that you get that situation. But often what happens to you as a social worker when clients come to you in a stressful situation, it manifests it in you, right? And you take it home and you think about it all night, correct?
Yeah, if they divulge something quite horrific, yeah.
Absolutely. And then you think about it all night until about midnight and then you go to sleep. What do you have that night after you've been divulged that horrible information? You have a nightmare, right? Well, the thing is, the way the brain works is short-term memories are converted to long-term memories right before sleep. So if you want to remember something and lock it in, study it just before bed or just after you wake up. It's when these two proteins are most active. So a good example for that is horror movies. Does anyone like horror movies in the room? Yeah, some might not. If you watch one of those before you go to bed, what are you going to have? A nightmare. Because suddenly you've watched it at the worst possible time for your memory acquisition. You've moved it from short-term to long-term memory. So my advice is, if you do like horror movies, but you don't like the effect of it, a nightmare, watch it during the day, and it won't have the impact that it will right before bed. Alright, so memory is very important. So because memory is so important, I've introduced a document called The Source. And The Source, I got inspiration from The Matrix. Has anyone seen The Matrix? Neo returns to The Source. The Source is a digital version of your brain. So many of you have done something in your past or in your background, and let's say you went to a training for a half-day training, you had a really great time, but have you acted on the training there? No. And suddenly it slips into memory. The Source is basically something I want you to get into the practice of doing, not only for your clients, but also for yourself. When you do PD, go home and write it somewhere on a document. When someone gives you a phone number, go home and write down the name of the person and the phone number. Because if you leave it in here, what's going to happen to it? Straight away. So this is something I want you to get into practice of. Many of you have done PD as part of your training. Does AMES do PD for the HSP program? You know, a little bit. Do they give you certificates or anything like that? Or no worries. But a lot of people, when they get a certificate, they go, oh great, I've got a record of it. What happens to that certificate when you get home?
It's in the garage.
It's in the garage, it's underneath the bed, or it's in a wardrobe somewhere, and it's lost to time there as well. What I want you to do is whenever you do PD, whenever you do 1D training or do something new, put it into a document which is your digital brain. So write it somewhere so that way you can access it. So have this one source for everything. And really what it is, it's basically memory, which you can use Control F to find. Does anyone know the Control F function? Yeah. So Control F will allow you to search for a keyword. So you can use that to search for anything. So if you've got a giant document, Control F, you can search for a keyword. So that will help you with that, right? But the best thing about the source is it's not like your memory, it won't fade. It's basically something that grows, whatever you do. Alright, the rules for the source is it must be a Word document, it must be in standard font, and you've got to have these subheadings: employment, education, training, sporting, volunteering, hobbies, career planning. It might be music that you like, it might be bands that you went to, it might be holiday destinations that you went to, it might be your favourite beaches, it could be anything and everything about you. It might be networks that you work with. If you work with Hanover Housing or Task Force, maybe it's a person that you know within there. Linking those two together and putting it somewhere, it's really, really important. So what I want you to do is start to develop a document which I call the source. Other people can call it a master document or a master template, where you put all your information in, and that's where you go to reference stuff for your resume. This is an example for my source document, which I think is embarrassing as well as it's funny. So it's a very private document. The source document's yours. I played basketball. I won regional championships in that. I was a treasurer of a student organisation at Swinburne Uni. I organised my family reunion of 70 people up in Yea. If anyone been to Yea before, it's really beautiful. So you should go there, it's nice. I have extensive travel experience around Australia. I used to sing in a boys' choir when I was about 7 or 8. I was in the Cubs and Scouts when I was in Wonthaggi. I also used to help out at the canteen, and I know how to use a phone system. This is the tiniest selection of some of my source document. If I jump to here, sing in a boys' choir, what skill is that I've got there?
Being part of a team.
Part of a team? Absolutely. If you're part of a choir, what else does it exhibit from singing? Practice, confidence, discipline. What else do singers do normally when they perform? They stand on a stage in front of how many people? Hundreds. So it's public speaking. Do you guys love public speaking? Yes or no? So not everyone likes training in front of other people. Lots of other people get empowered by it as well. So for me, it's one of my skills. So if you think about even something like travel around Australia, what skill can you get from that? I'll just check this is recording. Yep, beautiful. So what skills can you get from travel around Australia? Budgeting's a good one, absolutely. Organisation skill, itinerary, really good. What kind of job could you do from extensive travel knowledge, let's say globally? Travel agent, tour guide, hospitality, work at a resort, those kind of things as well. Bus drivers are good people because they know about the local areas as well. So even your travel experience. How about the bands that I like? Metallica, Megadeth, Iron Maiden are bands. I'm not saying they're on my playlist, it's on that phone so we can look later. So heavy metal, what job would that be valid for?
Working with loud noises.
Working there is with loud noises, sure. Sometimes working with youth there as well. It might also be, have you been to Paran? You've been to that office? Has anyone been there? Downstairs there's a art class, right, with Tony. Tony puts on this radio and he puts in classical music for the seniors. They feel comfortable doing their life drawing. Hopefully it's not life drawing with seniors, doing their artwork there as well. But then when the youth cohort comes in, he changes the music. So I suppose music can be music therapy. That's pretty big around there as well. Certainly within social work realm, music and art therapy are there. Also there's the direct skills, working in heavy metal music store or JB Hi-Fi in those capacities. So nearly any skill or any experience that you have or most of your hobbies will lead you to other elements within. So what I want you to do now is actually an activity. If you go to your green pages, hopefully they're all green, someone got a pink one. Yeah, you're not excluded, so I just wrote out of the green paper there as well. What I want you to do is I want you to write something really obscure about you in any one of those boxes. And as a group, we're going to decide what skill you can get from that or what industry they could do. Not obscure enough that it's embarrassing, but certainly write something about you that you wouldn't put on your normal resume. Just one answer. You don't have to fill in each of the areas. So just one. So there's hobbies on the next page, travel.
Do you want like one answer for each box?
Not just one answer overall. So just one answer overall. So maybe choose the section that you enjoy the most. Yeah. Yeah. And I might start with Z, because I can see he's finished. Can you tell us one entry that you put under one heading? We're going to try and make it as obscure as possible, and as a group we've got to try and link it to a job or an opportunity or a skill.
Employment history, I put kitchen hand.
Yep. So what skills do you have from a kitchen hand? Not yourself, you want to go the other ones, yeah?
Fast-paced.
Fast-paced environment, yep.
Under pressure.
Under pressure, good. So food handling skills obviously there as well.
Reorganized.
Absolutely. And also what's the communication like there?
Not good.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty loud and mean.
It's pretty loud and pretty mean, but it's direct and it's almost like mission based. So there's no why chef. It's always yes chef, yes chef, yes chef. So it's dictatorial. So in environments where you're going to work in a capacity that you follow orders, that's certainly a good skill to put on. Thanks. Vivi, what have you put on?
I put like reading in the hobbies.
Yeah. What reading? What skills does that give?
Literacy.
Literacy, obviously. Hopefully filling in the activity would help with literacy as well. But also, what type of books?
Like fiction.
Fiction. Oh, okay. If you did, just as an example, library work, those sort of things as well. Working those ones, making recommendations. You could also do with that part creative work, so writing scripts, editing, proofing, those kind of things as well. Reading helps you with those ones. But also think about if she was interested in crime investigation and all of those sort of things. That would be a skill that she would draw upon in forensics, for instance. So, cool, Frank.
I just do that first one here, which is as a delivery driver for a bakery.
Okay.
I didn't really put that on my
Yeah. Really good question. That goes into the second session. Should you put on a job that doesn't relate to your profession on your resume? Yes or no? Yeah, I do, but I don't mention it as a delivery driver. I often write contracted or casual position, unrelated to field, but put in the date there as well. Because if Frank didn't put that on his resume, it would leave a gap. And let's say, I'm not saying you were doing it for 10 years, but let's say you were doing it for 10 years in this instance, suddenly there's a 10-year hole.
Well, it depends how far back you go.
Absolutely as well. So, but also the delivery driver thing, so it's about knowledge of routes, best systems to take as well, which would lead to what other areas? Taxi, logistics, transport. No worries. Jamie, what have you got?
I put down working as a trampoline bungee assistant.
Okay, that's actually not too bad. What jobs could that potentially lead to?
I guess cash handling.
Cash handling is good, that's a good skill.
Working with children.
Yeah.
Working with children, absolutely.
Strapping kids in and out of harnesses, yeah.
Yeah, safety would be huge in that area, wouldn't it? With harnesses and all those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it might be those adventure parks that you go to, abseiling, all those kind of things. Have you ever taken onto a camp? Often they have trust building things in camps. Don't know if you do abseiling that much, but they do ropes courses, all those things. Certainly a skill that you could draw upon for that. Yourself, Megan?
I worked and travelled with the Carnies.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying related in that kind of way, but certainly similar experience there to Jay.
So obscure, so that was it.
That's a very good one to do. But similar situation there as well. You're talking about public speaking, confidence, those kind of things as well. It's also time management. Teamwork is huge in that sort of environment, especially if you're doing trapeze /
Oh, not those kind of Carnies. Like the show, the Melbourne show.
Oh, okay.
And I was working in a food van. But they're all criminals, it's like underworld.
So,
Yeah.
well, I don't want to put that particular skill. Creative, inventive would be probably the best one.
You should write a book about it.
No worries. Celeste, how about yourself?
I had when I worked at Hungry Jack's,
Yeah.
just at like the front counter.
Front counter, so customer service, food handling there as well. Complaints you would get, people complain about their order, so being polite, customer is always right, those kind of things as well. Yeah. James?
I wrote down a hobby which is fishing.
Fishing? Fishing's a good one to put on there. So what skill would that lead to? Yeah, well obviously it leads to commercial fishery there as well, but it's also calming, those kind of things. It's good for tourism, travel. Knowing good fishing spots is a really good thing for the travel industry. So yeah, your stuff. What skill?
I got ethics approval for a project at uni,
Oh wow,
which was a detailed process.
that's actually pretty good. So what sort of area would that lead to? Quality assurance, trust mechanisms, management roles, confidential information, privacy and principles officers, those kind of things as well. But also designing policy would be a big area. Ethics are part of that. Eva?
I work in a dairy farm, which
Yeah.
is far from social.
I used to live on a dairy farm, so it's very similar like for me. So what kind of skills or what kind of industry would you draw from that? Sense of community, agriculture, those kind of things. Time management, definitely.
Getting up early every morning.
Yeah, it's also, if you look at the drought that's happening in New South Wales, all the things that are happening with that, it's about, I suppose, rationing and figuring out yields. So those kind of things. Yeah, travelling and getting up real early is a factor of it, of course. Jackie, yourself?
I worked as a sales in Vodafone store.
Oh, wow. So what kind of industries would that be? What kind of industries would that lead to?
For me, I just introduced the best plan for the student.
Yeah, well, that's true as well. Sometimes it's about sales, motivating people, convincing skills, those kind of things as well. So conversations that you might have and basically gently guide a person to a destination. It doesn't necessarily happen in social work as much, but often we give a person a destination and we assist them get to the destination, but we don't make the choice. For instance, does anyone have a friend that smokes? Yeah. Exactly. Self-determination is big in smoking. My friend, I went to his Bucks party on Saturday, has started and stopped smoking 3 times. And no matter how much I think about it and how much I whinge or complain about it, it's not going to change unless he decides to go down that pathway. And self-determination is a huge thing in our area. All right. So the next part I wanted to talk about is relevancy. Many of you have known me. How long have we known each other for? Some of us for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Others for maybe 8 to 10 years. James, I've known you for 8 to 10 years. Would you give me the keys to your home and the password to your security system? Be honest as possible.
In what context? For what reason?
Exactly. You would ask questions, but you would be reluctant, correct? And we've known each other for 8 years there as well.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Most likely. But if you look at an interview situation, after a half-hour phone conversation with you, 1 hour interview, checking your reference, let's say 1.5 hours, what does the employer give you? The keys and the password to their office. So they have to take a huge leap of faith based on a paper document, which is a resume, and after that, an interview. And you might say, it's not a really good analogy, but I think it is in a way because we want to make sure that on your resume, we quell their suspicions. We make them feel as though you're trustworthy or that you're able to be entrusted with those things as well. So you're not just going to give your keys and password to someone who doesn't have the qualities, the skills, the ability to do the role. And that's why relevancy is so important. I've put on this picture, I am good at stuff. I've never seen that on a resume, but I've certainly seen some people put some really vague stuff on their resume. What I've created is the isolation test, and that's where I put on one duty on a piece of paper, and I show it to a random person. And I said, based on this duty, what does Megan do? And if they can't guess from that one duty, that one statement, what Megan does, it's a poorly phrased statement. So then I revise it and tweak it and said, based on this statement, what does Megan do or what did she do? So I want you to think about each bullet point on a resume and contextualize it and make it relevant. That way when the employer reads it, they know the specifics of what you do. And I'll give you an example. Good communication skills. What do I do? Just from this bullet point. Anything and everything, right? The problem with it is it's too vague. It doesn't mention anything about what type of communication. It's too general and it's standard. Can I tell you, everyone puts that on their resume. Good communication skills. Here's another way to rephrase it to add a little bit of depth. Able to communicate with people face to face and over the phone. What industry do I work with? It's exactly the same. I've just put in 2 extra words or 3 extra words. So it's still too general, it's still too vague. Can I tell you, I've seen this thousands of times on resumes. The next one is I'm going to show you a fully isolated statement. Well-developed communication skills, able to elicit positive and calming interactions with clients who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, over face-to-face and over the phone. What job do they do? From that statement. Social worker, housing worker, right? Exactly. Now, if you mention it like this, you might say, that's a lot of work to do, you're just going to pad out a resume. Not all of the bullet points need to be isolated, but you certainly need to use the language and terminology that they would expect for that. Now, you notice I still mentioned the word communication skills. And the reason for that is recruitment agencies use matching software. If you don't use the same terminology from the key selection criteria, then the job matching software may not pick it up when they do the scans through it. So whenever they have a keyword or a selection criteria and they mention keywords, put the keywords in, scatter them through your document. Does that make sense? All right. Now we're going to get to an isolation test, which is another activity. I want each of you to take a profession out of here and a duty out of here. I do not want you to show your profession card to anyone else, but I do want you to rephrase the duty, and as a group we've got to guess what his profession is. Okay? So take one of these and one of those. Don't show your person next to you. So they're pretty much random, you can grab anyone.
Yeah.
Oh my god, sorry, that is such a horrible match. What? But I reckon you can do it. I think you could. Oh. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It's tough. It's tough. I'll give you. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. If you think you need help, you can call me over, and I'll hopefully whisper in your ear.
Right, so we're guessing the profession.
Yeah, so you've got to restate the duty or the skill without mentioning the word of the profession. So if you say, I'm a good customer service providing doctor, then I pretty much know it's a doctor. So I don't think your one's actually possible though. So
I'll try.
you'll try. If it was bus driver or something else, then it would have been much harder. Oh, nice, thank you.
So we can use the words on the
You can use the words on the duty, but don't reveal your profession. Sort of like, do you remember that game Guess Who? Where you said, does he have glasses?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And some of you are going to get some really hard matches, so I apologise for that's it. Sorry. No worries. I might, has anyone finished? Or? No? I'll give you another minute or two. We might start with Jackie. You can keep writing if you're still phrasing it, and I'll just jump around. Jackie, what's phrase your duty, and we'll try and guess the profession.
Just well organize the skills and cure people who have disease.
Okay, yep. Can you say that a little louder, if that's right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
A person like who has well organized skills and cure people who have disease. Not doctor.
Nurse.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So, you didn't mention the word nurse, which is fantastic. So, yeah, good.
I'm
Good.
not ready.
You're,
Sorry.
yeah, no worries. We can jump on to Z. His one's quite hard, so.
Well-developed computer skills, able to use information technology to research on the latest irrigation methods.
What job? Farmer. Bang. There you go. Actually, so you could have mentioned yield. You could have talked about Rainfall gauges, it's really important for those, maybe wind, those kind of things. So yeah, you could have even done weight biomass, you could have done milk solid, milk fat ratios. I'm from a dairy situation, so it's probably, yeah. So you underestimate, so well done, that's great. And well done to you as well. No. Vivi?
Okay, so well-developed problem-solving skill.
Yeah.
When there's no appropriate equipment, is still able to make the office clean. Yeah.
Clean up, yeah, good.
Able to oversee the delegation of in-store duties, capable of counting cash and balancing a till, displays excellent time management between customer service and stock take duties.
What job?
Yeah.
Retail sales, yeah. Good stuff. Well done. Dave?
Ability to manage multiple tasks, maintaining concentration on the road alongside other distractions including interacting with passengers.
Alright.
Bus driver.
Bus driver, yes, nice. Well phrased, that's good.
Yeah.
Megan?
Excellent time management skills, ability to comprehensively cover all curriculum material within allocated class times, as well as marking and returning students' work in a efficient time.
Teacher. Bang. Not within my allocated time frame. Much larger group than I expected. Celeste?
I treat illnesses and I provide health services.
Yep. What job?
Doctor.
Yeah. Yep, James?
What's that? Punctual and reliable at dealing with a range of criminal scenarios.
Yeah, police. Yeah, corrections officer. Yourself?
Consistently shows punctuality and reliability when attending both scheduled maintenance appointments or emergency call-outs for hot water system breakdown or drain blockages.
That is pro-level statement there, so plumber. That's amazing. Well done. So, and lastly with Ava?
Well-developed teamwork skills by ensuring that internal and external messages and communication are delivered to all team members by phone or email.
Yep.
Manager?
Office worker?
Kind of, but
Office worker.
Reception?
Yeah, that's great. I think you all did really, really well. The thing is that you're not expected to draft someone's duties without resources, and that's what the second part of today is all about. But really, I think you embraced the isolation test. You did really well, so it's fantastic. So as part of assessment, I suppose, I'm really glad that you filled in those forms. It's just an activity for now, but if you've got a client resume that you'd like me to look over, or you've been working on one, or you'd like some help, I'm available to meet up with you for individual feedback there as well. Particularly if it's an industry that you're not familiar with, I might be able to explore that with you and certainly build up your skill in that capacity. So in order to close out the day, now we talk about our outcomes. So we've learnt about the strength-based approach, we've talked about the source, and we've talked about utilising information from the source. Rather than delete it, copy it over to your resume. When you go home and you meet someone new or you do something new, write it onto the source before it becomes a memory, or a memory fail rather. And lastly, use the isolation test. Remember to contextualise it. The more the employer reads in and is comforted by your resume, the more likely they are to get those keys. Alright, so the next session is this afternoon at 1:30 till 2:10, and it's about resumes and components of resumes and how to design one for a client. Bear in mind the information in this afternoon is tailored for resumes for clients. Your own personal resumes, it's a whole 7-hour presentation, which we're not going to do today, because you'll go home at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, but I'm certainly hoping to do that with social work students, and certainly if staff want to come along and you speak to your manager and are able to, I'm happy to do it. I'm not sure if you've done it, Megan, by training? So.
Yeah, and I got a bunch of interviews out of it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. So,
I didn't get
and that's on
but
film.
I got interviews.
That's actually recorded on an iPhone device. It was very successful, so, which is all good. But thank you so much for session 1. Any questions? And if not, let's have lunch and meet back here at 1:30. Yeah, 1:35. Cool. Thanks, everyone. And now I have to get to record. Thanks, Sophie.